Namaste. Migrant labourers. It is only in the past few months that this term migrant labourers has become familiar with everyone. Before this, they were invisible to us, even insignificant, although their contribution to the national income of India is significant and considerable. In the face of pandemic, their return to home has brought this migrant labor population to the forefront, and their plight has moved a lot of us people, you and me. However, in the absence of the pandemic, what kind of lives were they leading? Have you thought about that? How has the pandemic affected them? And what does the future hold for them? Today's episode will cater to all these questions, so do watch it till the end. Don't forget to like. If you have already subscribed, do hit the bell icon, and if you are really feeling motivated, please leave a comment below. So let's get started. Who are the migrant labourers? As per the 2011 census, India has around 5.6 crore of migrant labourer population. They mostly come from the Hindi-speaking belt of Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar and Jharkhand. Many reasons are there for them to migrate from their states, which include high population density, floods, low rainfall and lack of employment opportunities, and social and political conflicts in their states. The big cities like Bangalore, Bombay, Delhi hold dreams, hold many employment opportunities for them, and which attracts them to come and work in these cities. The migrant labourer face a lot of disadvantages. Firstly, they don't have any formal education, no skills, and they are mostly illiterate. They are not aware of their rights and they are ill-informed. They are mostly exploited into working in low-end, low-value and hazardous work. There is no policy to provide them with legal and social protection. They work very hard with low wages and without any decent shelter, fair priced food, subsidized healthcare, and no facilities for them and their family members. One of the major disadvantages that they face is there is a lack of proper data on the migrant labor population, and that is why even government and civil society initiatives leave them out of their welfare schemes. Most of the times these people are out of their states, they don't carry their identification papers with them, and as they are mostly out of their states, they are unable to participate in elections as well. So you might ask, isn't there any law, act or policy for the welfare of this huge population? There is. The Interstate Migrant Worksmen Act of 1979 is on paper but is rarely implemented. Under this act, the contractor who brings these migrant labourers from their states is supposed to obtain a license from an authority from both the places, the state of origin from where the migrant labourer comes from and the destination state to which the labourer is going to. Under this act, the contractor is also supposed to obtain a certificate of registration. The contractor is supposed to provide all the details of employment clearly and honestly to the migrant labourer as to the working hours, payment and working conditions. Under this act, the migrant labourer is supposed to be provided with proper shelter, protective clothing and medical facilities. On top of that, this act provides for the appointment of an inspector from the state of origin who could come at any time and check the migrant labourers' working place and living conditions. So where Where were these contractors when these laborers needed their help the most? Where did they vanish? Why so many of the laborers were not paid their wages which was due? Where were the employers and contractors when these laborers needed help the most in the face of this pandemic? Even when the pandemic was not in place, these migrant laborers live in very unhygienic conditions and work at very low wages. They don't know about their rights, and even if they ask and demand for them, they risk losing their jobs. In the face of this pandemic, these migrant laborers were left to fend for themselves. I'm sure that they were pushed to a wall to such an extent that they did not understand what was happening and did not know what to do, as there were no jobs, rents to be paid, there was no food and water, no security for them and their families. And it is in these conditions they must have decided to go back to their homes, their villages and towns. These laborers build our houses, they construct roads, bridges, buildings, they build cities. They have a huge role to play in India's growth story. India's economic growth depends on them. Despite that, we as a society and country let them down. For now, the migrant laborers have left the cities, exhausted, tired and heartbroken. But they might have to come back in search of work, or they might be lured to come back, as India's economic growth is dependent on the mobility of laborers. In all probability, the laborers will forget this trauma and move on. But we as a society should not forget this. If we want India to grow and we want this growth to be inclusive and sustainable, we as a society need to stand up for these migrant laborers and push for their rights. These migrant laborers don't need our charity. They deserve their due. The legislation needs to work towards making the Act of 1979 more strong and implement it properly. The contractors and employers need to be held accountable. The laborers and their families need to be provided with proper facilities. Our legislation needs to turn migration as a more rewarding and dignified process. And for that, proper data needs to be collected and compiled on the migrant labor population. The Election Commission of India has extended voting rights to the NRI population as they contribute to the country. Similarly, the migrant labor population should be given remote voting rights, as their contribution to the country's national income is also huge. Let's work together to make India a healthy, strong and welfare nation where no one feels alienated and no one is left out. Jai Hind.